This is my true story. My son put me in an old age home 3 weeks after my husband died. Not because I was ill, not because I needed care, but because he said the house felt too heavy with me in it. I didn't cry when he left me there. I didn't scream when he took the family photo off the mantle before I left. I didn't beg when the staff wheeled me into a room with a flickering bulb and a stranger's clothes still in the closet. I just sat with my hands folded. I thought, maybe this is what happens when you love someone too much. Maybe silence is how they thank you. He told me it was temporary, that it was just to get through the grief, but he didn't visit once in the first month. Not even a call. I waited in that room, in that place that smelled like canned soup and bleach and regret. And every night I whispered to my husband's photo, telling him what our son had done. You won't believe what I did next. Before I tell you, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Now, let me take you back, before the home, before the silence, before the dust covered my name. Let me tell you how I raised a boy who could leave his own mother behind like a leftover dish. It didn't start this way. It started with lullabies. He was my miracle. After 3 miscarriages and 1 stillbirth, he came into the world screaming like he had something to prove. And maybe he did. Maybe all that pain before him filled me with such desperate hope that I poured too much of myself into him. I was 39 when I had him, and the doctors told me not to get attached. But I did. From the first time I held him against my chest and felt his tiny fingers curl around mine, I knew I would give my life for that boy. And I almost did, in small pieces, every day. I quit my job at the bakery even though we needed the money, because daycare felt like too much of a gamble for a baby we waited so long for. I made every bottle from scratch. I warmed every blanket on the radiator before tucking him in, and I hummed the same lullaby every night until he started singing it back in his sleep. My husband, God rest him, worked long hours at the steel yard, but every Friday night we'd take turns rocking our son while the other massaged their aching back. It wasn't easy. The house was old, the walls thin, and the bills heavy, but our son never knew hunger, never knew cold. He had hand-me-downs, yes, but they were always clean and pressed. I remember once, he scraped his knee at school and they called me to pick him up. He was only 5, sobbing with blood on his jeans, and when he saw me, he ran like the world had ended, and I was the only person who could save it. That look, that trust, it lived in his eyes for years. He used to leave sticky notes on the fridge that said, "Love you, Mommy," with hearts drawn in red crayon. I saved everyone, even when they faded, even when he stopped writing them. I taught him how to tie his shoes, how to say thank you, how to pray when the lights went out during storms. He was a quiet boy, smart, always asking questions about how things worked. When he was 12, he wanted to build a birdhouse. And even though we didn't have the right tools, my husband and I figured it out with nails from the shed and scrap wood from behind the garage. He painted it blue and white, said it looked like home. That birdhouse is still out there, rotting now, but I never threw it away. Maybe because part of me still sees the boy who built it, not the man who left me in a hallway and signed paperwork like it meant nothing. But back then, he was still my baby. I made his favorite dinner, chicken stew with dumplings, every Sunday, even when he went through that phase where he pretended not to like it because his friends liked pizza more. I could see through it. He always went back for seconds when no one was looking. He grew taller than me by 15, started shaving by 16, and stopped saying, "I love you," when he turned 17. But I never missed a birthday, never forgot a dentist appointment, never once made him feel like he owed me anything. That's the thing about motherhood. You give without asking. You love without proof. And sometimes that's exactly how you get left behind. It wasn't one moment that changed everything. It was 1,000 small ones that no one else would have noticed but me. The day he stopped calling me Mom and started saying Ma like it was a chore. The time he rolled his eyes when I asked if he wanted tea after school, like I was bothering him instead of caring. He never yelled. That would have been easier in some ways. At least shouting leaves bruises you can point to. But silence? Silence cuts slow and deep. I used to sit on the edge of the couch waiting for him to come home from class, eager to hear about his day. But he'd rush past me, earbuds in, muttering, Fine, before disappearing into his room. And I'd just sit there, hands folded, pretending I was already getting up anyway. By college, the distance became geography. He got a scholarship and left home, and I told myself it was good, that he needed to grow, that boys pull away so they can become men. I packed his bags, slipped money into his coat pocket, and kissed the side of his head. He didn't kiss me back. He called less and less. At first it was every Sunday, then every other. Then I was chasing his voice through voicemail. Holidays came and I'd cook for 3 even when it was just the 2 of us, my husband and me, hoping he'd show up anyway. He didn't. He'd text last minute, "Can't make it, work stuff." But I knew. I saw pictures on Facebook of him smiling with friends, turkey legs in hand, girls on his arm, his laughter bright like it used to be when he was 5 and I carried him on my hip. After my husband passed, a slow, cruel cancer that took more from me than I knew I had left, I thought maybe he'd come back, not just for the funeral, but for me. But he stayed only for the service, didn't even help me close the casket. He said, "Mom, I got a flight early," and hugged me with one arm. One arm. Like grief could be half felt. After that, the house felt like it belonged to ghosts. I wandered rooms we built a life in and heard nothing but echoes of "I love yous" that no longer existed. I tried calling him once after I found a lump in my breast. Turned out to be benign. But I still wanted to hear his voice. He didn't answer. Texted me 4 days later. "Sorry, been busy." I didn't reply. Didn't know how. What was I supposed to say? "I needed you?" That stopped working years ago. He visited once that winter. With her. The girl he married too fast. The one who never looked me in the eye. Who wiped down the chair before she sat like my house was too dusty for her jeans. They brought takeout. Thai food. Said they didn't want me to strain myself cooking. I remember nodding and forcing a smile, even though my dumplings recipe had been his favorite. They left after an hour. Didn't even take off their coats. I washed the plastic containers and threw them away. That night, I cried into my apron, but only after I made the bed. That's how it always was. I broke down only after everything else was done. That's what mothers do. We fall apart in private. We stay composed until the silence gets heavy enough to press against our ribs. And by the time the silence becomes normal, you stop noticing how much it hurts. But I did notice. I noticed everything. I noticed how he never asked if I was okay. How he didn't know I'd started wearing glasses. How he didn't remember I was allergic to shellfish when they brought pad thai. I noticed how he checked his phone while I talked. How she called me "your mom," like I wasn't even in the room. I noticed that when they left, neither of them said "thank you." That was the hardest part, not the distance, not even the forgetting. It was the way they treated my love like background noise. Something that was always there, expected, and unnoticed. And still, I waited. I waited like I used to wait for him to come home from school. I sat in the same spot on the same couch, hands folded in the same way, pretending I was already getting up anyway. But this time, I never did. The waiting didn't stop, even when I knew better. Even when my back ached from the cold floors and my knees creaked from climbing stairs that no one cared to help me with, I still waited. I waited through birthdays where the only candle lit was the one flickering over my stove. I waited through holidays where wrapping paper stayed folded in the closet and ornaments remained untouched in boxes that hadn't been opened since my husband died. I waited for a knock on the door that never came. For a phone call that stayed in the imagination. For a voice I hadn't heard in weeks, sometimes months. The refrigerator hummed louder than the silence in the living room. That's how I measured time. By the way, silence changed its sound. He only called when it was about money, when his car broke down, when rent was late, when they hit a rough patch. I always sent what I could, even when it meant eating soup from cans and stretching old meat further than I should have. I thought, maybe this time he'll say thank you. Maybe this time he'll visit. But kindness became currency, one that didn't pay me back. I remember the last time I gave him money before it all changed. He came by unannounced, bags in hand, wife at his side, saying they needed space while their apartment got repaired. I let them in without asking questions. I gave up my room without hesitation, said I'd take the guest room, the one with the draft, the one closest to the garage. They didn't say thank you, just walked in like they owned the place, like my house was a motel and I was just part of the furniture. She rearranged my living room without asking, moved my husband's photo from the mantel and replaced it with a vase with plastic flowers. I stood there quietly, pretending it didn't feel like erasure. He asked for access to the Wi-Fi. Didn't even look at me when he said it. Just muttered, "Do you still have that old password?" I wrote it down, left it on the counter. They never invited me to dinner when they ordered food. Sometimes I'd smell pizza through the vents, hear their laughter drift down the hallway like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. Other nights I heard them argue, her voice sharp, his voice exhausted. And then, nothing. Silence again. Always silence. One day, I tried knocking on the door just to ask if they needed anything. She opened it a crack and said, "We're good," then closed it before I could ask about the mail. I started taking walks around the block just to breathe air that didn't feel ignored. I sat in the park across the street, watching other families play, children running to their grandparents with sticky hands and wide smiles. I wondered if I had imagined mine, if maybe I had misremembered the years of lullabies and scraped knee bandages and bedtime stories. Maybe none of it mattered, because here I was, invisible in my own home. I washed their dishes, took out their trash, folded their laundry when they left it in the dryer. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a maid, an unpaid one. One evening, I overheard her laughing on the phone. She said, "She still thinks she owns the place." And then a long laugh, the kind that makes your bones feel colder than ice. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wallpaper peeling near the window, remembering how long it had taken me and my husband to pick that exact shade of cream. It had faded now, just like everything else. Faded into something they didn't notice, didn't care about, didn't value. And still, I waited. I waited because part of me still believed he was in there. That little boy who used to hand me hand-drawn cards with hearts that looked like potatoes. The one who cried when he lost his first tooth. The one who asked me if I'd still be around when he had children. I waited for him to remember, to wake up and see what he'd become. But each morning, the silence answered first. And the longer I waited, the more I realized I wasn't waiting for him. I was waiting for the part of me that used to believe he loved me the same way I loved him. But that part was vanishing too, fading like the wallpaper, curling at the corners, peeling quietly, and one day I knew it would fall away completely. There was a morning when everything began to shift, though no one else would have noticed. That's the thing about being ignored long enough. You become fluent in small changes. I had gotten up early, as always, to water the garden. Not that it was much of a garden anymore, just a few stubborn rose bushes clinging to the earth the way I was clinging to the past. I passed by the kitchen, where their dishes from the night before were still stacked in the sink. Greasy, careless, and overflowing. I stood there, sponge in hand, just staring at them. Not angry, just blank. I didn't wash them. That was the first change. Instead, I turned toward the hallway and looked at the door to my old bedroom. Closed, of course, locked from inside. I used to knock gently, asking if they wanted coffee, breakfast, anything. But that morning, I didn't knock. I walked straight to the living room and sat in my late husband's recliner, the one they always said was too bulky for the aesthetic. I sat in it like I used to when the house still felt like home. I let my body sink into the familiar grooves, closed my eyes, and breathed in the smell of old leather and time. It was the first moment in weeks that I felt like myself. A few hours later, she came out, phone in hand, talking loudly about some online shopping returns. She looked at me, startled, as if I was intruding in my own chair. Didn't say a word, just turned and walked back into the bedroom. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was hollow. That night, I heard them talking about more space again. I only caught fragments. Something about me being set in my ways and how they needed privacy and boundaries. The next morning, my coffee mug was missing from the cabinet, the one with the photo of me and my husband on it. I found it in the trash outside, shattered. They said nothing. I said nothing. But inside, something began to tighten. I noticed other changes, too. My knitting basket was moved to the garage. My medication was accidentally placed in a different cabinet. My favorite blanket, the one he gave me before he passed, was gone from the couch, replaced by a newer one, tag still on, soulless and soft. And yet, I stayed quiet. I watched it all happen like I wasn't even there, like I was observing someone else's life unravel. I started walking to the library every day, not to read, just to sit, to be around people who didn't know me well enough to hurt me. I'd stare out the window at the children playing on the lawn or at the sunlight shifting through the trees and wonder when I had become invisible to the one I gave everything for. I thought of all the nights I stayed awake nursing his fevers, of the school lunches I packed with love notes, of the sacrifices I made so he could go to college, buy his first car, build his future. And now, I was a shadow in his rearview mirror. Not a mother, not even a person, just in the way. The refrigerator stopped holding things I liked. The groceries were all for them. Fancy sauces, frozen appetizers, oat milk I couldn't pronounce. My shelf in the pantry slowly disappeared. My voice followed. I once asked if I could bake something for the neighbors, and she laughed, saying, "No one wants old people cookies." He said nothing, not even a glance in my direction. That silence, that gutless silence, was louder than any insult. I stopped asking after that. But I kept watching, and I remembered. I remembered every time he looked through me, every time she made a joke at my expense and he let it stand. I remembered how she once said, while scrolling through her phone, "She doesn't even know how to use the internet," as if I was some relic they were forced to endure. I remembered how they used my bedroom as their storage room, piling their boxes on top of my husband's old military chest without asking, without caring. And I remembered how one afternoon I walked into the hallway and heard them whispering behind the door. "Maybe we should bring up the idea of a senior home." "Not yet. It'll look bad if we do it so soon." They didn't know I was standing right there, that their words were not whispers, but arrows, that their plan wasn't secret, just slow. I didn't cry. I went back to my chair. I sat in it all night, didn't sleep, didn't blink. And in the stillness, a different kind of clarity arrived. Cold, steady, and quiet. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was watching, observing, calculating. I wasn't helpless. I was just quiet. And silence, I was learning, can be power if you hold it right. The moment the pamphlet arrived in the mail, I knew they had made the decision. It wasn't handed to me directly, of course not. It was left sitting on the edge of the dining table, just far enough into my line of sight that I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen it. Sunset Acres, where comfort meets care. A smiling elderly woman on the front cover with a halo of soft focus light around her silver hair, as if loneliness had been painted to look like a spa day. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I had seen enough of those places to know exactly what they were. The final waiting rooms for people whose families were too busy to carry guilt. For the next few days, no one said anything, but their behavior shifted. She began casually asking if I had looked into any retirement options. He started bringing up stories about coworkers who took care of their parents by helping them find good facilities. It wasn't a conversation. It was a campaign. Every polite nudge was a push. Every mention of independence and comfort was a slow erasure of the life I had built inside that house. My home. The house where I raised him, where I buried my husband, where every floorboard had a memory nailed into it. One night I overheard her saying on the phone, "She's just taking up space. We can't even have people over without it being weird." And him, my son, he didn't correct her. He just laughed softly and asked what she wanted for dinner. The next morning, the house key I always kept in the flower pot by the back door was missing. When I asked if someone moved it, she said, "Oh, we don't really need that extra one lying around anymore, do we?" As if my ability to come and go from my own home was now optional. I stopped arguing. I stopped reacting. But I noticed. I noticed how they started rearranging the living room furniture again, talking about making the space more open. I noticed how they boxed up my husband's books from the shelf and carried them to the garage without asking. I noticed how my bedroom door suddenly had a creak in it, one I was sure had never been there before, as if reminding me each time I crossed the threshold that I was entering a place they wished was already empty. Then came the doctor's appointment I never agreed to. She said she had scheduled a checkup just to make sure I was healthy, but I knew what it was: a pretext, an evaluation. They wanted a report card to show the retirement home staff. And when I returned, I found that some of my drawers had been opened. Not robbed, just searched, quietly, efficiently. My paperwork was no longer exactly where I left it. I didn't need proof. The absence of denial was confirmation enough. Still, I said nothing. I went about my days as if I didn't feel the walls moving inward. I watered my plants. I dusted the picture frames. I walked around the block with my shawl tucked tight, trying to feel the cold instead of the shame. The final insult came on a Thursday. He brought home takeout for dinner, Chinese food, something he knew I loved. But he and his wife set the table for two. When I entered the room, I saw them already halfway through their meal, laughing about something on the television. There was no third plate, no extra chopsticks, not even a glance in my direction. I stood there in silence, waiting to be noticed. I wasn't. After a moment, I turned and walked to the kitchen, thinking maybe they had left me something. On the counter was a single fortune cookie in its plastic wrapper next to a napkin, like a child's offering of guilt. I sat alone at the kitchen island, breaking open that dry little shell with trembling fingers, hoping maybe the universe had something to say to me. The fortune inside read, "A new path is waiting. Walk it with courage." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I placed it gently in the drawer beside my husband's obituary, closed it, and turned off the light. I knew then that my presence had been reduced to an inconvenience, that my worth had been quietly rewritten in their minds as a burden, not for anything I had done, but simply for continuing to exist. The grief of losing my husband had never fully healed, but now it was layered with the sting of betrayal from the one person I thought would carry me through old age with dignity. I remembered the night he was born. I remembered the first time he fell asleep on my chest. I remembered the birthday cakes, the scraped knees, the bedtime stories, the late-night worry during his first heartbreak, all the years I had loved him without conditions. And yet now, those years had become invisible, like dust in the corners, always there, never seen. I had given him life. Now he was trying to shelf mine. But I wasn't ready to be erased. Not yet. I was quiet. Yes. But inside. That silence. Something different began to grow. Not rage, not hatred, just a cold, clean awareness. They had forgotten something, something that had once made this house theirs. But it wasn't theirs. Not truly. Not on paper. Not legally. Not financially. It had always been mine. And in that forgotten detail, in that oversight, was my answer. I didn't rush it. I didn't announce it. I simply began to plan. The moment I knew I was done wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream or a slammed door or a storm of tears. It was a silence that settled over me one morning while I was folding towels. The blue ones, the ones I had bought during a clearance sale at the old department store before it closed down. I folded each one slowly, pressing the creases flat with my hand, and something in my chest just stopped moving. Not from pain, not from exhaustion, but from finality. The kind that only comes when every effort has already been made and none of it mattered. I didn't feel sorrow anymore, just stillness. The kind of stillness you feel in the eye of a storm, the moment before the rest of the wind tears everything away. That day, my son left for work at the same time he always did, just past 8 a.m. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even acknowledge that I was sitting 5 feet away on the porch with a blanket over my legs. She didn't come out at all. I heard her voice inside, talking on the phone, laughing, probably planning the weekend with her friends, and that was when I knew, truly knew, that I was no longer family to them. I was just furniture. Something old that had outlived its usefulness but hadn't yet been discarded. They had been waiting for me to leave, gently, quietly, by some natural process. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I had given them years. My husband and I had built this life from brick and grit and savings tucked into coffee tins. And now they thought they could ease me out of it like a stain from upholstery. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't remember. But I remembered everything. I remembered whose name was still on the deed. I remembered who made the down payment. I remembered how, even after my husband passed, I never removed his name from the paperwork because I wanted to keep him alive in some corner of our home. I remembered all of it. And in remembering, I remembered who I was. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't an afterthought. I was the woman who held this house together with stitched curtains and homemade soup and silent prayers at night. I was the reason my son ever knew safety. And I was going to remind him, not with words, not with anger, but with paper. I began to move differently after that morning. Quiet, steady, deliberate. I started making phone calls during the hours they were gone. I kept a small notebook in the pocket of my apron, jotting things down between chores. I reviewed the ownership documents. I scheduled a meeting with a notary. I reactivated the online account tied to the property taxes. Everything still had my name on it. They had forgotten that. Or maybe they had assumed I had. I let them believe it. Let them keep planning their life as if I was already packed away in some floral wallpapered facility across town. Let them laugh at the table. Let them roll their eyes behind my back. Let them step over me like a misplaced shoe. I didn't care anymore, because I had already stepped out of the role they gave me. I wasn't the forgotten mother anymore. I was the architect of my exit. There were moments when I almost hesitated. A picture frame, an old drawing my son made when he was 5, the sound of his laughter when he was still small enough to hold my hand in public. But those memories were mine. They didn't belong to this version of him, the man who let his wife mock me, who let my grief turn into wallpaper, who watched me shrink into the corners of my own home and did nothing. That wasn't the boy I raised. That wasn't the man I believed he could be. And so I separated them in my mind. I mourned the son I had, and I planned for the man who remained. No shouting, no confrontation, just a quiet erasure. The same kind they had tried to do to me. They would never see it coming. They had no reason to. I was just mom, just her, just the old woman who still took too long on the stairs. But they didn't know I had spent decades listening without being heard. They didn't know I had learned how power works in silence. They didn't know I had one final story left, and it would end with them standing outside a locked door, holding nothing. Not even a key, because I had the deed. I always did. I didn't pack much, just the important things. My marriage photo in its broken wooden frame. My mother's gold earrings I hadn't worn in 20 years. A stack of folded paper bills I had tucked behind the lining of my suitcase like I was planning my escape all along. I didn't even take the winter coat. Let him wonder where it went. Let him find it later and think I forgot it. I didn't forget anything. I remembered everything. Every word. Every silence. Every time he walked past me in that home and didn't look. Every dinner he ate without asking if I had eaten. Every week he left me sitting in that cramped hallway waiting for a ride that never came. And every Sunday he laughed in my face and said, "You've got everything here, Mom. Don't be dramatic." That house, that was never his. Not in spirit, not in blood. It was my husband's. My name was on that deed, not his. We paid it off year after year, month after month, while he was out pretending to be too busy to visit. And then he thought it was his? He thought he could lock me away, take the living room furniture, repaint the walls, and call it his home? I let him believe it. I let him get comfortable. I even smiled when he dropped me off and said, "This is for the best." And then I waited. I waited through the quiet months, through the hot summers and the dead phone calls. I waited until the property tax was due and I paid it, until the maintenance bill came and I signed it, until every utility, every bank record, every line of proof said one thing: that house belonged to me. Not him, not his wife, Not their entitled dinners or their forgotten birthdays or their smug conversations about the burden. They thought they could pretend I was gone. So I decided to make it true. The day he drove off to work, another morning where he left without saying a word, another hour spent pretending I wasn't real, I made the call, one call. That's all it took. I'd already spoken to the realtor. I'd already arranged the viewing. I'd already found a buyer who saw the bones of that old place and said, I want it. I'll pay in cash. I walked through the house one last time while he was gone. I ran my fingers along the kitchen table he used to sit at as a boy. I paused in the bedroom where I used to fold his socks when he couldn't even say thank you. I looked at the backyard, the same yard where he learned to ride a bike and scraped his knee, and I kissed it better. I said goodbye to every corner he had forgotten, every wall he had painted over, every part of me he had erased. And then I signed. I signed the sale with a pen he once bought me for Christmas. And when it was done, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't feel triumphant or cruel. I just felt still. Like the storm had passed, like my heart had finally stepped off the battlefield. I left a note on the fridge. Nothing dramatic, just one line. It's not your house anymore. I took the keys. I walked down the driveway. I didn't look back. By the time he got home, I was already gone. The living room was empty. The kitchen was silent. The deed had been transferred. The sale had been finalized, and the locks had been changed. The man who put me in an old age home, who told me I was too much, too slow, too broken, walked into a house that no longer knew his name. And when he called me, 3 times, 9 times, 21 times, 37 calls in a row, I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because some truths don't need to be screamed. They just need to be signed in ink and sealed in silence. I didn't leave him homeless. He did that to himself. I just stopped pretending he was still my son. And in that silence, I finally heard peace. I watched the voicemails pile up without playing a single one. They came fast at first, angry, sharp. His voice cracked between confusion and rage like a man who had just stepped into a ghost town that used to belong to him. "Where are you?" he barked into the machine. "What did you do? This is my house." But it wasn't, and he knew it. The next few calls changed tone. They became quieter, rushed, desperate. He must have realized how fast his life had been built on a foundation that didn't belong to him. His wife must have been screaming. The bills still came, but now they weren't in my name. The mailbox overflowed at his rented flat, not mine. I never told him where I went. That was part of the gift. Letting him sit in silence the same way he left me in silence. Letting him walk through memory after memory, realizing every plate, every photo, every square of tile under his feet was never his. Not really. He left me to rot in a room surrounded by strangers, stripped of family, discarded like I was a problem to be solved. And now, he was the one explaining himself to landlords and agents and debt collectors who had no sympathy. He texted me once. Just once. It said, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a while. Not because I was tempted, not because I needed closure, but because I wanted to feel what he must have felt when he walked away from me all those times. How easy it was to press ignore. I didn't reply. Not then, not after. I moved into a little cottage outside the city. Nothing big, just peace. I decorated it with old photos, the kind he never asked about. I sat on a porch swing and watched the birds, like I used to dream about. No nurses, no alarms, no pitying glances. Just space to breathe. One day I got a letter. No name on the envelope, just his handwriting. It was short. No apology, just questions. "Why would you do this to me?" I was trying to help. I folded it in half and burned it in the sink. Not out of anger, but because it had no weight. A child who thinks love means ownership has never understood either. I still kept the wedding photo on the mantle. My husband would have been proud of me. He always said, "Don't let them bury you before you're dead." I finally understood what he meant. My son had already started shoveling. I just got up and walked out of the grave. I heard later that he tried to fight the sale. He called a lawyer, tried to dig into the paperwork. But everything was airtight. My name, my rights, my decision. He lost more than a house. He lost a mother. Not because I vanished, but because he erased me long before I made it official. You don't mourn something you threw away. You just notice its silence. And that's what he had now. A silence he built with his own hands. He taught me how easy it is to leave someone behind. I just returned the lesson and signed it with a key. It's strange how silence can become your best friend after everything. Not the silence of being ignored, not the silence that comes from a room full of people who don't see you, but the silence you choose for yourself. A kind of silence that doesn't beg anymore, doesn't explain, doesn't ask for anything at all. That's what filled my lungs the morning I left the keys behind. That silence. I didn't slam the door, I didn't leave a note, I didn't cry. I just walked out of the house I once built with hands that bled from scrubbing and feet that cracked from standing too long, cooking meals he never remembered. I walked past the flowers I once planted with my husband, the ones I watered even after he died, because they felt like the last part of him that bloomed. I walked away from the couch where my son used to sleep, curled up on my chest as a little boy. The same couch where he now sat as a grown man, flipping through channels while the old woman he'd stuffed into a facility counted pills and stared at a wall. And I didn't feel guilty. Not for a second. I had already paid every price they could ask of me. The guilt, the shame, the constant bargaining, I had done it all for years. But that morning, there was nothing left to explain. He made his choice when he walked me into that cold building and told me it was for my good. He made his choice when he signed my name on a form I never read and left me among strangers whose eyes looked like mine, hollow and stunned, like someone had stolen the years right out of their bodies. He made his choice when he turned me into an obligation instead of a mother, a burden instead of a blessing. But I made my choice too, and mine was permanent. I heard he came back that evening and found the house empty. No furniture, no food, no lights. The locks were changed. The deed had a new name on it. Mine. The silence in that moment must have been louder than any scream. He tried calling, 37 times. Left voicemails, texts, even sent someone to knock at my sister's place. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had spoken without words. That was the difference between me and him. He used his mouth. I used my hands, my years, my soul. He spoke disrespect into my face. I spoke freedom through action. I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't a fight, it's a release, not burning bridges, just quietly removing yourself from the land they thought they owned. And once I let go, I felt younger than I had in decades. I no longer waited for birthdays that weren't remembered. I no longer looked at the door, hoping someone would visit. I stopped checking the phone for a message that never came. I let it all go. And in that space, that empty, echoing space, I started to breathe. Real air, clean air, air that wasn't laced with sorrow or apology or tension. I sat on a porch that didn't echo with arguments. I slept in a bed that wasn't next to a wall filled with snide comments. I made coffee in a kitchen that didn't ask me to be invisible. And every sip reminded me that I was alive, not waiting to die. Alive. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about what he lost. If he ever scrolls through old photos and wonders why I'm no longer in the new ones. If his wife ever asked where the woman who raised him went, and if he answered honestly. But that's not my story anymore. That's his chapter to live. I'm not writing in his book now. I've started my own. One that doesn't begin with "I sacrificed" and end with "he forgot." One where I wake up and smile, not flinch. One where I eat what I like, go where I please, and don't wait for permission. I spent too many years teaching him how to walk, how to speak, how to hold a spoon, only to be treated like a stranger who overstayed her welcome. But I know now that motherhood doesn't come with guaranteed returns. You give, and give, and give, and then sometimes you walk away. Not bitter, just done. That's where I am now. Done. I don't hate him, I don't wish him harm, but I don't miss him either. Because you can't miss what never came back. And he never did. Not after those calls. Not after the house was gone. He disappeared into the silence he created. I didn't block him. I just stopped looking. Stopped listening. My heart stopped opening that door, even mentally. I chose peace. And once I tasted it, I realized I'd been starving for it all my life. It wasn't loud. It wasn't bright. It was gentle, quiet, like the sun through a window at 6 a.m., or the sound of your own breath when no one's judging it. That's what I have now. That's what I earned. What would you have done if you were me? If the child you raised turned your love into labor, your years into ashes, your name into a joke? If they replaced your hugs with empty forms, your voice with silence, your presence with absence, would you have stayed? Would you have waited for an apology that never comes? Or would you have done what I did? Walked away while they weren't looking and never turned back? My son put me in an old age home after my husband died, so I sold the house while he was at work and left him homeless.